Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the session here. Isn't it fantastic? In the program, there were only 3 letters, ACG, and nothing else. So, that might be enough for you to come. But the real title, which was not announced, is really Telemedicine and the opportunity for rethinking drug product development. Everybody talks about what it is, this telemedicine, digital medicine. What I want to try to give you an insight about where are we, what happened actually, and how will this impact our development. First of all, it was a burst of a hype, everybody was jumping on it, but what was the evidence? Yeah? And the next thing is, what are now the implications if digital health, telemedicine will move forward? And how do we move forward? Because that's basically our business. And then some conclusions. So let me give you a little bit the background. This emerged from really some freaks, technology freaks, who developed some kind of variable diagnostics and smartphone technology. And basically, the idea was we have some variable diagnostics which are biocompatible, electronics, which is then by miniaturization get so small and so decent that you can really attach them to your body from outside, but also into body fluids with very high sensitive sensors who can really detect certain biologics, certain parameters in a very small area. Afterwards, you need to do this data analysis. What does the data you take from the body gives you as an information concerning the health? The next thing, it needs to be available. Yeah, whatever you do, people need to have access to it, need to be able to use technology and have technology available. So that is the next step which is missing, and then basically you connect all these dots, and that's digital health telemedicine, where you have a patient which is completely controlled during the day, certain parameters, if it's clinical, if it is plasma concentration, which is going through the internet, through the mobile phone, near field communication, straight away to healthcare providers. This doesn't mean that every doctor has now a list of information. It goes through algorithms, and if everything is okay, the algorithms will tell you that the patient is in good order, but alert on the very difficult cases where you might really need to do an intervention. You can measure today in many different areas. You can measure in the breath, you can measure in the sweat, you can measure in tears, in body fluids directly, and indeed on the skin where you take some electronics to really measure heart rate, blood pressure, glucose level in the blood. So that is the idea of telemedicine. Yeah? And technology companies promoted this idea, and the freaks with Fitbit, take it on your arm and you're healthy, and people running around with their phones and say, wow, I made 10,000 steps today. This was the birth of how you could measure vital functions. But this doesn't mean that you're already on the market, because it was more or less coming from freaks of a lifestyle generation. Promotion. And this, in a healthcare environment, it's less freaky, because everything what we are doing is based on scientific evidence, clinical and scientific evidence. If we don't have evidence, clinics, we are not using this in healthcare applications. And clinical evidence is provided by clinical studies. So just say I can measure something doesn't mean that a doctor will use it. Because what is the validity, what is the viability of it? And therapeutic interventions like medicines, you cannot easily study, because there is no study design existing. It's not going through like a clinical phase where you say I have a placebo group, I have 2 arms of medicines, and then I measure towards certain endpoints. Because in this intervention you're dealing with people in daily life what is the parameters you're looking at, how do you randomize the patients, what data do you need to take to really provide the clinical evidence. So that there had to be done a lot of work just to develop the right method of a clinical study to provide evidence on the efficacy of telemedicine. And this challenge has been resolved over the years. And I give you now a little bit insight of the clinical concept. So between 2005 and 2008, basically we started to have some kind of sensors to measure certain vital parameters. Then we validate the sensors on blood pressure, heart rate, and so on. And this happened in 2008 and 2010. And basically everybody was talking about the young freaks, you know, you have this lifestyle, healthy telemedicines. But this happened in this time. Then there was a time frame where the clinical trial protocol was developed and pilot studies took place. And now we are starting to have really pivotal trials, which means you go and enroll much more patients, and this not just in one country but across the world, to get the clinical evidence of how to use digital health and telemedicine and what the benefit would be. Afterwards, once we have this clinical benefit and the evidence, implementation will start. And this will happen because the evidence is there, as I will show you in a few moments. Nevertheless, in parallel, you will see a lot of developments going on sensor development and algorithm development and measurement development of these vital parameters. And this is still ongoing. We see continuously innovation in new sensors coming up in the years. Now, I was 2 weeks ago. I was at the Charité in Berlin, where one of the studies were performed by Friedrich Köhler. He is one of the inventors of telehealth in the cardiovascular area. So he started a study several years ago where they included 1,500 patients. They randomized them in group who received telemedicine and group who received normal care. And they had different endpoints, and the major one was really the cardiovascular events, heart attack and hospitalization. And what you can see here is that there is a significant reduction in cardiovascular events if you utilize telemedicine. And the reason for this is very simple. A heart attack not just occur out of the blue. Already days before, you can see that the cardiac function is somehow moving out, or you see edema coming up. So you can predict, if you have these parameters at hand, that this patient is going somewhere in a serious situation, and you can have preventive interventions. So it's not longer reactive, that you wait until the patient has a heart attack. You can intervene early on. And this is what they are now going to do on a real pivotal trial, where they enlarge the patient population and the number of patients over the next years. Whereby they also want to develop and validate certain algorithms for prediction. Yeah? And this is just a trial which runs about 4 to 5 years until the evidence is there. And the evidence will also give us some way forward of how we're going to implement it. So what will change? Our treatment today is reactive. But if you really see you have a direct clinical feedback, first of all, the patient will also be much more informed about their disease, because today they don't know what the heart rate is. Suddenly they can see the heart rate. The next thing is that we can monitor the progression. So adherence might not be as important as now really measuring the clinical effect. Do I reach my endpoint or not? Then early interventions. I can be preventive early on with the right treatment for the patient. It's global reach. How do we want to treat patients who are out in the rural side? Yeah, while everybody, the young guys moving into the cities and the old guys stay in the countryside, how do we want to deliver healthcare? So we can get it at any place, wherever they are, we can monitor patients. And it will be personalized, so we see something what we call phenotyping. I can not only have the genotype, but also the phenotype. I can see certain patients with a certain trajectory. Again, intervene preventively. And then I can treat to target. If I want to have a certain blood pressure at 70, 120, I can treat the patient to this target because I measure 24 hours and not just once they come into my shop. And indeed, manufacturing. How do we manufacture these products? That's a real challenge for the industry because now we are not having a mass manufacturing and just ship it out. Now we need to have much more individualized therapeutics, either fixed dose combination or specific dose strengths. So what is the future requirements then for the industry? Treat to target. So how do we make sure that we have flexible manufacturing that can give us for the patient exactly the combination of drugs and the doses they would require? And if you look to the prescription guidelines, this is not magic science. If you look to the blood pressure, for example, as we talk about cardiovascular events, you see the 4 classes which are prescribed to patients with a certain diagnostics. So immediately you see that are the classes, they are simultaneously prescribed, and in each class you might see 3 or 4 drugs. So the level of drugs which we need is not gigantic, it's not for everybody, but it's an assembly of very few drugs in specific dose strength combination. And for the patient we select then specifically the drugs. This will increase the drug subdosing. Yeah, that means we are not giving everybody a very precise dose, but the dose subdosing will increase. So we are not just having the 20, 40, 80, we might have the 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 and 80. Yeah, so already here we need to have a larger dose strength available. How do we manufacture these things? So on the one hand, we don't want to get rid of mass manufacturing because that's the cheapest, the most efficient way. Now consider mini tablets. Yeah, you take the lowest subdose and you manufacture them in bulk. So you would have the large manufacturing, and then you have cost-efficient, flexible manufacturing platforms who can, for example, fill such unit in any dose strengths, in any subdosing, into a capsule, a sachet, or whatever. And you need to have short cycle times. It's not that you say, I need to have 2 years or 3 years to develop or manufacture a specific batch. So this is what is our challenge. And if you look to a case study here, it's heart failure. And this is from the prescription guidelines, as I told you. And you see here the drug classes and the number of drugs which are required. And even within these drug classes, you see that the majority is related maybe to 2 APIs per drug class, which is prescribed. And you see also the subdosing or the dose sequence the doctors have to prescribe. So this is not a magic science. It is not that you have really to specially manufacture for some people. It's that we know exactly what the scope is, what we need to deliver, and what will make the difference for the patient. And this predefined increasing subdosing steps is our challenge, because if you make a tablet, you have only 1 dose strength, and then you say, yeah, split it once, twice, 3 times. Where do you put the other half? Nobody knows. And based on disease patterns, and that's the real challenge for patients, is that they are exposed to 2 to 3 to 5 drugs immediately. And if we consider polypharmacy as 5 drugs and more, you see that even with 1 disease, you reach polypharmacy. And this complexity, and we have done a lot of studies with patients, is really causing medication errors and issues in therapeutic outcome. So this is reality. That's what we have to, what we'll face. and telemedicine will be the entry into controlling patients and having the right treat to target to the patients. Now, patients are challenged with polypharmacy, as I said. Polypharmacy are not patients who are young and healthy. These patients are normally old and multimorbid. So their capacity, their functional capability is declining, while at the same time the complexity of the therapy is increasing. And you reach a tipping point by when the workload of managing the therapy supersedes the capability of patients. And that's when medication errors happen, which can be fatal. And polypharmacy is a huge workload. I can show you other things and also what we have done patients. The workload of polypharmacy is incredible when you have all these dosing requirements before breakfast, after breakfast, morning, afternoon, or only morning and evening, or only evening. So this is really complex. And the patients get into an imbalance of having too much demand and can't coping with it. And that's a challenge, because here we miss with our effective products to reach the therapeutic target. So telemedicine will lead us immediately to what we call fixed dose combinations, to reduce the complexity. And that's tailoring a product for the patients that they can easily use it and that they have the right dose and whatever is required. Now we talk about this mass manufacturing of mini tablets, multi-particulates, because that is really suited for sub-dosing or individualized dosing, dose delivery. First of all, we use standard technology. It's established. Mini tablets, pellets is really an established technology which you have. You leverage mass manufacturing and you individualize the drug at the final filling station. You can provide distinct dose units with multiple release profiles. So you have an immediate release portion and a sustained release portion. So you can get a once daily. Also, if you compare it to others like liquids, you work with a dry state of the drug, which is much more easy to deal with, which is much more stable. But as you can use this multi-particulates in soft food or drinks, like the FDA, they have a good guideline on the vehicles for sprinkler application. It becomes a liquid form basically at administration. So you have the stability and from a drug development perspective the solid state, but at administration you have the liquid stage. And the sprinkle use requirements, it need to be compatible with food and beverage, and FDA has a good guideline here, very easy to follow. It can be either directly into the mouth or mixed with small portions of food. That's important that it is a small portion. Don't put it on the entire food because not everybody eats it completely. It is easy to release from a packaging. So you just have this personalized dose requirements and you release it. And here are the different types of options that are used or considered for these multi-particulate systems. But consider the following. If you see something like these novel technologies, we have done research with patients, it's a syringe. Who would consider a syringe for oral administration? Maybe nobody, and patients also don't do it. Here you need to have a very good eyesight on the dosing requirement. The spoon is not easy because the dose variation is high. You have the sachets, which is difficult in manufacturing because you need to have a certain dose level on the one hand, and it's a very specific equipment. You have the capsules, which is not easy to open, but there are special capsules which are easier to open. But the beauty is you have filling machines everywhere. So filling is a standard operation. You have no need for acquiring any additional technology. Oral dispersible tablets is a single dose, so you would need to manufacture this multiple dose strengths, so you go back to this tableting issues. And then you have these straws with the pellets, which is a nice thing technically, but unfortunately everybody sees this like a pen and opens it in the horizontal position, and then the multi-particulate spread around the floor. But anyway, I just show you, the possibilities you have. Now, the clinical evidence and the benefit of telemedicine is really getting now into the public domain. And just as we have this clinical evidence, it starts to change our way of developing drugs. This technology, digital and sensor, will drive it further. So it will become really a commodity. And today there are even skirts which have all the sensors. You have just patches, clocks, there are multiple ways of applying them. And this is, I think, one of the most important things. If we say, well, yes, what is the return on investment? The return on investment is very simple. It always happens when regulatory authorities put forward a guideline, because then you have to apply, right? And I'm working very closely with EMA, with FDA on these guidelines. We had several workshops and several conferences on this. And they are very clear that patients play a critical role, maybe a more critical role than pharmaceutical sciences, in achieving the right use and the outcomes. So you see that the patient evidence of usability, patient evidence on clinical outcomes is getting a requirement of regulatory authorities. And there is a lot of discussions ongoing right now. I'm working with a lot of companies, with academia, consortia we have formed even to bring this forward, really to figure out how do we deal with it and what is our answer from an industrial standpoint. So it remains the industry, the responsibility not only from the pharma industry but also from a supplier standpoint. What can a supplier provide to the industry as a help to commonly develop this more personalized, patient-centric products? And that's why we see also as a supplier our responsibility. That we are not just saying, we give you what you want, but we are really working together with the industry, with academia, with medical doctors, gerontologists, just on finding out what do we really need to provide this evidence and how do we use it to optimize our products. And that's what I said here. We have a lot of collaborations, we have a lot of involvement in if it's regulatory, if it's scientific, if it's patient research. And this is also what we provide along with our product. So it's not just giving you one excipient or one component. We really try to build the science and evidence around it and focus on what are the new emerging trends, what are the new challenges for this industry. And how do we do it? First of all, by our experience. So this is just a publication I did at the Charité with Mrs. Elisabeth Steinhagen-Thiessen. She ran the Berlin aging studies, 2 of them. One was just started in 2014 with about 2,400 older patients and also younger representation. And in this study, we just observed patients, really patients who have a cognitive, an MMSE, as we say, a mini mental scale examination of more than 25, so cognitively fit, who was in daycare and were delivering home. And we wanted to just observe how they use the treatments, the drugs they get, their schedule. And we found out very, very interesting results which help us to optimize products and to really tailor them. And this is our knowledge and expertise and network we provide. But most importantly, we have a lot of science and technology within our group that helps to achieve certain product designs by capsules, by films and foils to protect, easy to open, all of this, and engineering and the inspection. which really means, how do we make sure that we track and trace for patients, because we might individualize down to the level. Well, and that is what I would like to show you, and my contacts here. I'm associated to ACG, but also to the University of Graz, where we do development together with patients and patient research. We do engineering, cost of good examination, PAT, and so on. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, please let me know.